My name is Owen Croft, and for the past decade, my life has been shaped by the rhythm of the tides. I'm a coastal ecologist at the Blue Horizon Institute here in Port Blossom, a small, fog-kissed town where the scent of salt and pine is a constant companion. My work involves the quiet, patient study of intertidal zones, the resilient, ever-shifting ecosystems that exist in the space between land and sea. It's a gentle profession, one that teaches you to observe, to understand the subtle forces that govern life, and to respect the boundaries that nature itself creates. I met Lena 10 years ago, when I was 28 and she was 26. We found each other at a local farmer's market, both reaching for the last bunch of purple kale. She was a veterinarian, a co-owner of the Willow Creek Clinic just outside of town, and her hands, though gentle with a skittish kitten, had a strength to them that I admired. We fell in love easily, a current pulling us together over a shared reverence for the natural world. We spoke the same language of quiet wonder, whether it was over a new species of sea slug I'd identified, or a stray dog she'd nursed back to health. We bought a small cottage with a sprawling, unruly garden that we tamed together, planting lavender and rosemary and a stubborn old climbing rose that eventually consented to bloom for us. Our life was, I thought, like the ecosystems I studied, balanced, interdependent, and beautiful in its simplicity. But every ecosystem has its invasive species, or perhaps, an element so deeply rooted it changes the landscape for everything else. For our marriage, that was Nate. Nate was Lena's childhood best friend. They had grown up in houses that shared a backyard fence, their lives intertwined since infancy. He was a permanent fixture in her stories, a character in a mythology I could never truly enter. He was married to a lovely, thoughtful woman named Sophie, and they had 2 young children. I always knew of their bond. Lena was transparent about it. I saw it not as a threat, but as a testament to her capacity for loyalty. In the beginning, it was easy to overlook the subtle ways our marriage deferred to their friendship. A phone call from Nate would interrupt our quiet dinners, and Lena's attention would shift so completely it was as if a curtain had fallen between us. Plans we made would be held in a provisional state, pending Nate's family's schedule. I, being a quiet man who dislikes conflict, told myself this was the price of loving someone with such a deep history. I wasn't a jealous person. My work taught me that most things in life are far too complex and mysterious to be possessed. But over time, the deference began to feel less like an accommodation, and more like a hierarchy. When we were planning our wedding, a simple affair in our garden, Lena insisted Nate be her man of honor. I remember the slight tremor of unease I felt. But I barely know him, Lena, I'd said, trying to keep my voice light. You know me, Owen, she'd replied, her smile bright and dismissive. And he's a part of me. It wouldn't feel right without him standing up there with us. I acquiesced. On our wedding day, Nate stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder in half the photographs, an inside joke passing between them during the vows that made her laugh in a way I hadn't prompted. I felt a strange, formless chill, like the deep ocean currents that move unseen, but change everything on the surface. The quiet erosion of our shared space continued. If Nate needed help building a treehouse for his kids on a Saturday, we'd planned to spend hiking. Our plans were cancelled. If he was having a hard day at his architecture firm, Lena would spend hours on the phone with him, her voice a low, soothing murmur I rarely heard directed at me. I tried to see it as kindness, as her beautiful, expansive heart at work. But a part of me, the part that observes the slow, inexorable patterns of nature, saw a system falling out of balance. I was becoming a satellite in the orbit of her and Nate's lifelong connection. The turning point, the moment the tide finally turned against us, came during a conversation about our 5th anniversary. It was a cool evening in late spring, the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine drifting in through the open kitchen window. I'd been carefully saving for 2 years, tucking away a little from each paycheck for something truly special. I was thinking, I began, swirling the wine in my glass, for our anniversary, we could finally take that trip to Santa Fe. We could spend 2 weeks exploring the art galleries, hiking in the high desert. Just us. Lena had spoken of Santa Fe for years, of its turquoise jewelry and the unique quality of its light. Her face, however, didn't light up as I'd expected. She bit her lip, her gaze drifting towards the window. Oh? Well, the thing is, Sophie's family has that lake house up near Whisperwood Lake, and Nate was saying they are all going to be there for the last 2 weeks of July. He thought it would be fun if we got a cabin nearby, so we could all hang out. I set my glass down, the soft clink loud in the sudden silence. Lena, that's our anniversary. I wanted it to be. For us. We can see Nate and Sophie any weekend. They live 15 minutes away. Her expression hardened, a subtle shift I knew all too well. It was the look she got when she felt my quiet observations were a form of judgment. Why do you always have to make it a competition, Owen? It's not about choosing. It's about being with the people we love. I'm not making it a competition, I said, my voice softer than I felt. I'm asking for our marriage, for this 1 week, to be the priority. To be its own space, separate from everyone else. That was when the ground gave way. She looked at me, her eyes clear and unwavering, and delivered the sentence that would recalibrate my entire world. You have to understand something, Owen, she said, her tone patient, as if explaining a simple, immutable fact of nature. Nate will always be more important than you. He was here first. He'll be here long after everything else is gone. He's my family in a way you can't be. That's just how it is. The words didn't crash over me like a wave. They seeped into me, a cold, slow tide rising in my chest. It wasn't said in anger, not in the heat of a fight. It was a statement of principle. More important. Not equally important, not important in a different way. More? I stared at her, searching her face for a flicker of regret, a sign she had misspoken. There was none. There was only a calm certainty. I asked her to explain, to clarify, hoping I had misunderstood the crushing weight of her words. She doubled down. You don't have friends like that, Owen. You don't get it. He knows me better than you ever will. Our bond is just deeper. That night, for the first time in our marriage, I slept in the small guest room, the scent of lavender from the garden filling a space that suddenly felt vast and empty. The next morning, over a cup of coffee I couldn't taste, I looked at the woman I had promised my life to and realized I was, and always would be, a secondary character in her story. You have a choice to make, I said, the words feeling foreign and heavy in my mouth. You can be married to me, and we can build a life where we are the priority. Or you can have the life you seem to want, where your friendship with Nate comes first. But you can't have both. Not anymore. That's an ultimatum, she said, her eyes flashing with indignation. Yes, I replied, a strange sense of peace settling over me. It is? She packed a bag and went to her sister's, convinced I was being dramatic, that I'd come to my senses and accept my place. 2 weeks later, after many sleepless nights spent watching the moon rise over the quiet sea, I contacted a lawyer. I had spent my life studying the importance of healthy boundaries in an ecosystem. I finally understood I needed to draw one for myself. The dissolution of a marriage is a quiet, methodical process. It's the careful sorting of books into yours and mine, the gentle untangling of finances, the sale of a home that holds the ghosts of shared laughter. Lena seemed to exist in a state of disbelief right up until the day we signed the final papers. She was certain I would relent, that my love for her would override my need for self-respect. She had fundamentally misunderstood me. My love wasn't a weakness to be leveraged, it was a living thing that required a healthy environment to survive. The environment she had created was, I now realized, toxic to it. I moved into a small, second-floor apartment overlooking the Port Blossom Marina. The windows faced east, and I began to wake with the sun, watching the fishing boats head out into the pale morning light. The rhythm was a comfort. I filled my small space with books on marine biology, with driftwood I collected on my walks, and with the profound, uncluttered silence of being alone. I learned to cook for one again. I rediscovered my love for old jazz records, played softly in the evenings, as the fog rolled in over the harbor. I was not happy, not yet, but I was breathing. The pressure in my chest, a constant companion for years, had begun to ease. News of Lena, when it came, arrived like flotsam on the tide, carried by our mutual friend, Chloe. Chloe was a kind soul who worked as a horticulturalist in town, and she navigated the difficult waters of our separation with grace. She never took sides, but she answered my questions when I asked them, which I tried not to do often. About 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Chloe met me for coffee. She looked troubled. "Sophie is having a hard time," she said, stirring her latte with unnecessary vigor. "Oh?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "It's Lena," Chloe sighed. "She's over there all the time. She shows up with dinner, she does their laundry, she takes the kids to the park. Sophie said it feels like Lena is trying to co-parent with them." I felt a familiar, weary sadness. "And Nate? He doesn't see it," Chloe said, shaking her head. "He just thinks she's being a good friend, that she's lonely after the divorce and needs family around her. But Sophie feels like she's being pushed out of her own home." This was the pattern, magnified. Without our marriage as a container, Lena's intense, focused energy had poured entirely into Nate's world, and the vessel of his own family was beginning to overflow. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected email. It was from Sophie. She asked if I would be willing to meet for lunch, that she had some things she wanted to understand. We met at a quiet seaside bistro, the air thick with the smell of fried fish and salt. Sophie had always been reserved, but today she looked tired, her shoulders tense. "Owen, I hope this isn't too strange," she began, her hands wrapped around a glass of iced tea. "But I need to ask you something. When you and Lena were married, did you ever feel like her friendship with Nate was inappropriate?" I chose my words carefully. I felt that it was the primary relationship in her life. Our marriage often came second to it. Sophie's shoulders slumped in relief. "Thank you. I was starting to think I was going crazy." She went on to describe a life under siege. Lena showing up at Nate's office with his favorite lunch. Lena reorganizing their kitchen pantry to the way she knew Nate preferred it. Lena buying him a ridiculously expensive watch for his birthday, a gift far more intimate and extravagant than the one Sophie had given him. The final straw, she said, had come the week before. Lena had told her, with a chilling sort of sincerity, "Now that I'm free from my marriage, I can finally dedicate myself to the people who truly matter." "She's trying to replace me," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. "She's acting like she's his wife, and I'm just a guest in their life." I looked out at the grey, churning water of the bay. "I don't think Lena is consciously malicious," I said, thinking aloud. "I think she's been in love with him her entire life, and has never admitted it, even to herself. She married me, I suspect, because it was the safe thing to do when the person she truly wanted was unavailable. Our divorce didn't break her heart, it set her free to pursue him." Sophie stared at me, her eyes wide. It was as if I had articulated a terrifying thought she hadn't dared to form herself. "That makes a horrible kind of sense," she whispered. We talked for nearly 2 hours. It was not a session of gossip or complaint, but a quiet, solemn sharing of experiences. It was deeply validating to know that I had not overreacted, that the imbalance I had felt was real and had now grown to monstrous proportions. When we parted, Sophie thanked me. She said she was going to have a serious talk with Nate, to insist they present a united front and establish firm boundaries with Lena. I wished her luck, feeling a profound sense of pity for this woman, who was now fighting a battle I had chosen to walk away from. That evening, I stood on my small balcony, watching the lights of the boats twinkle on the dark water. For the first time, I felt something more than just relief. I felt a flicker of gratitude for Lena's honesty that day in our kitchen. Her devastating words had been a gift. They had given me the clarity to save myself before the tide pulled me under completely. And my life was moving forward. I had started seeing someone, a fellow scientist from the institute named Faye. She studied the acoustic communication of whales, and she listened to my stories about sea anemones with genuine fascination. She was calm and centered and respected the quiet spaces in my life, because she had them in her own. With her, I felt seen. I felt like a priority. I was learning that a healthy relationship wasn't about being the center of someone's universe, but about being a star in a shared constellation, equally bright, equally valued. The conversation between Sophie and Nate did not go as planned. It became, instead, the catalyst for the complete unraveling of the bond Lena had cherished above all else. Chloe relayed the story to me a few weeks later, her voice laced with a mixture of shock and sadness. Apparently, when Sophie confronted Nate with her feelings and the litany of Lena's boundary-crossing behaviors, he was initially dismissive. He accused her of being insecure, of not understanding the depth and purity of his friendship with Lena. But Sophie held her ground. She laid out the evidence, piece by painful piece: the laundry, the unannounced visits, the way Lena spoke to him, as if Sophie wasn't even in the room. Finally, something broke through his obliviousness. He agreed to speak with Lena, to gently ask her to pull back. According to Chloe, who heard the story from a distraught Sophie, Nate invited Lena for coffee, intending to have a calm, rational discussion. But there was nothing calm or rational about Lena's response. When Nate began to talk about boundaries and respecting his marriage, she broke down completely. A lifetime of suppressed feelings came pouring out in a torrent of tears and confessions. She told him she had been in love with him since they were teenagers. She told him she had only married me as a placeholder, hoping that one day he would realize she was the one he was meant to be with. She told him that my decision to divorce her was a sign from the universe that their time had finally come. Nate, a man who avoided conflict at all costs, was utterly overwhelmed. Instead of a firm, unequivocal rejection, he tried to be kind. He told her he was flattered, that he loved her as a friend, but that he was happily married to Sophie and committed to his family. To Lena, his gentleness was not a closed door, but a door left slightly ajar. She heard his "I can't right now" as "maybe someday." His kind rejection became, in her mind, a challenge. She had to prove to him that her love was greater than his commitment to his wife. Her behavior escalated from intrusive to alarming. She started leaving handwritten notes on his car windshield at his office. She began calling Sophie, pleading with her to do the right thing and step aside. The most terrifying development came when Sophie arrived home from picking up her children from school to find Lena in their kitchen, calmly preparing a pot roast. She had somehow had a key made. That was the end. Sophie screamed at her to get out, and for the first time, Nate saw the true depth of Lena's delusion. He stood by his wife, telling Lena in no uncertain terms that their friendship was over. He changed the locks. He blocked her number. He instructed his secretary not to let her into his office. Lena did not take the rejection well. It culminated in a desperate, drunken scene one night on Nate and Sophie's front lawn, with Lena screaming for Nate to come out, that Sophie was a prison guard keeping him from his own happiness. A neighbor called the police. No charges were filed, but a warning was issued. Nate and Sophie began looking at houses in a different town. The friendship that Lena had sacrificed her marriage for, the relationship she had proclaimed was more important than anything, was utterly destroyed. She had clung to it so tightly that she had crushed it. Hearing all this, I felt a profound and hollow ache. There was no triumph, no sense of vindication. There was only the tragic spectacle of a woman I once loved systematically dismantling her own life in pursuit of a fantasy. My life, in stark contrast, felt beautifully, blessedly mundane. Faye and I were falling into a gentle rhythm, building something quiet and strong. We spent our weekends hiking the coastal trails, our evenings reading side by side on the couch, our conversations weaving easily between the migratory patterns of grey whales and the simple logistics of whose turn it was to buy groceries. It was a partnership of equals, a balanced ecosystem. The chaos of Lena's world felt like a distant storm, one I could see on the horizon, but whose rains no longer fell on me. In the aftermath of her spectacular implosion with Nate, Lena seemed to vanish from our shared social circles. The grapevine, however, still bore fruit. Chloe would occasionally share updates, her tone hushed with concern. Lena, it seemed, had thrown herself into a frantic, self-destructive new chapter. She was frequenting downtown bars I'd never known her to visit, places with loud music and sticky floors. She was trying, it appeared, to outrun her own devastation. It was in one of those places that she met Marco. From what I gathered, Marco was her polar opposite, and mine. He was a freelance graphic designer, nearly a decade younger, with a restless energy and a portfolio of fleeting passions. Where I found peace in routine and stability, Marco thrived on impulse and spontaneity. Lena began posting photos of them online, at loud concerts, on spontaneous road trips to cities hours away, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. She looked happy in the pictures, but it was a brittle, performative sort of happiness. She was trying to become someone else, someone who didn't have a gaping wound where her most cherished relationship used to be. I felt a strange detachment watching this unfold from a distance. It was like observing a foreign species through the lens of a microscope. I was no longer emotionally invested, only academically curious about the trajectory of her choices. My own life was taking root. Faye and I had decided to move in together, finding a slightly larger apartment with a wide balcony that could hold all of our potted plants and offer a panoramic view of the bay. We were building a home. Then, about a year after our divorce was finalized, the next piece of news arrived. Lena was pregnant. Chloe told me over the phone. Her voice was heavy. She's excited, Owen. She thinks this is it, her chance to have the family she's always wanted. The timeline was clear. The child was Marco's. A part of me felt a pang of something, not jealousy, but a wistful sadness for the family we might have been had things been different. But the feeling was fleeting, replaced by a quiet sense of foreboding. The premonition proved correct. Marco did not share Lena's excitement. When she told him she was pregnant and that she intended to keep the baby, he panicked. He told her he wasn't ready for fatherhood, that he needed space to think. Then, he disappeared. He stopped answering her calls. He moved out of his apartment without a word. He vanished from her life as quickly and chaotically as he had entered it. Lena was left alone, pregnant, and abandoned. The pattern was repeating itself, only this time with far higher stakes. Just as she had relentlessly pursued a rejecting Nate, she now began a desperate search for a disappearing Marco. She was replaying her own tragedy, blind to the recurring themes. Faye found me on the balcony that evening, staring out at the darkening water. She put her arm around my shoulders. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I am," I said, and I was surprised to find it was the absolute truth. I feel sorry for her. Genuinely. No one deserves that. But mostly, I feel grateful for this. For the peace you and I have built. She rested her head on my shoulder. You built that peace, Owen. You chose it. You drew a line in the sand and decided what you would and wouldn't allow the tide to wash away. She was right. I had chosen. And every new piece of information about Lena's life served as a stark, painful reminder that I had chosen correctly. I learned that Lena had been reaching out to old friends, but many were keeping their distance, wary of being drawn into the vortex of her drama. She had burned too many bridges, and now, in her moment of greatest need, she was finding herself on an island of her own making. The saddest part, according to Chloe, was that she had begun to talk about me. She was telling people she hadn't appreciated the stability I offered, that she had taken my quiet love for granted. She was romanticizing the marriage she herself had deemed secondary. But it was too late. The past was a foreign country, and I had no intention of renewing my visa. The final chapter of Lena's story, as it pertained to me, arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet finality of an outgoing tide. It turned out Marco's disappearance wasn't just about his fear of fatherhood. His reasons were far more complicated and sordid. Sophie, of all people, was the one who found out. In an act of profound compassion that I still find remarkable, she had kept an occasional, gentle contact with Lena, a text here and there to see if she was okay. They ran into each other in the produce aisle of the grocery store. Lena, now visibly pregnant and looking worn down by the world, broke down and told Sophie everything. She told her about Marco's disappearance, her fear, her loneliness. A week later, Sophie learned through a friend of a friend why Marco had truly vanished. He hadn't just left town, he had been incarcerated. He was a con artist who had been running a scheme involving fraudulent home repair services. He'd been out on bail when he met Lena, and his sudden flight was because his trial had concluded and a prison sentence was imminent. He was now serving an 18-month sentence in a state facility. So there she was, 5 months pregnant with the child of a convicted felon she barely knew. Her greatest friendship was in ruins. Her professional life was suffering. Her support system was a fragile web of her own making. Sophie told Chloe that Lena had even asked, her voice small, if Sophie thought Nate might be willing to talk to her, to help her. Sophie, with a kindness I'm not sure I could have mustered, gently told her that door was closed forever, and that she needed to stop looking backward for salvation. A few days after I heard this news, I came home from the institute to find a small package by my apartment door. It was a handcrafted ceramic pot, the kind you find at the weekend art market downtown. Inside was a small, perfect succulent. There was no note. I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was from Lena. It was her stylish gesture that was simultaneously intimate and non-committal, a way of reaching out without having to be vulnerable. It was a test, a seed she was planting in the hopes I would water it with my attention. Perhaps she hoped I'd call, opening a door for her to tell me her story, to lean on the stability she had once so casually discarded. I stood there for a long time, holding the small, heavy pot in my hands. I thought of the woman I had loved, the one who smelled of lavender and antiseptic, who could calm a frightened animal with a single touch. I thought of the garden we had built and the life I had believed in. And I felt a wave of immense sadness for her, for the path she had taken, for the loneliness that must be consuming her. But my sadness was a deep, still ocean, not a current to pull me back to her. My life was here, in this apartment, with Faye, who was at that moment inside, probably making tea and listening to the calls of humpback whales on her laptop. My life was the peace I had fought for, the healthy boundary I had drawn. To accept the succulent would be to smudge that line, to invite the chaos back in, even a little. It would be a betrayal of myself and of the life Faye and I were carefully, lovingly building. I carried the pot downstairs and gently placed it by the communal recycling bins, where someone who needed it might find it. Faye and I are engaged now. We are planning a small ceremony on the bluffs overlooking the ocean, just us and a few close friends. Sometimes, when I'm out in the intertidal zone, Watching the sea stars cling to the rocks as the waves crash over them, I think of Lena. I hope she finds her rock. I hope, for the sake of her child, she learns how to hold on. Her journey is her own, a solitary walk along a shoreline I no longer inhabit. My work has taught me that some ecosystems can't be saved, they can only be allowed to evolve. I have to believe the same is true for people. I have my own ecosystem to tend to now, one of balance, respect, and quiet, resilient love. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel perfectly, peacefully at home.